Good morning and welcome to episode 75 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined, as I am every Thursday, by Mia O'Brien, co-host of Helmets and Heels on 1010 92.5 FM radio in Jacksonville. It's on from 12 to 2 p.m. each weekday. And right now, Mia is in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. We're going to go over everything that she's seen and heard, all of the rumors and nuggets that she's got up from the Great North, but pretty much, as at least compared to Florida. So, Mia, welcome back to the show. How's Indy treating you so far?
Hey, it's good, Gus. I wouldn't call it quite the Great North. It's been like a balmy odd degrees most of the week. So, like, I've been able to, yes, and I had my winter jacket with me. I left it back at the hotel today. I may regret that later, but that's all right. I know we did have a monsoon in the morning on Wednesday, and it was so just loud that like you couldn't even hear some of the players that were paraded through here at the Indiana Convention Center. So we had a little bit of rain. We haven't had a ton of coldness, and apparently, sunshine the rest of the week here in Indianapolis. So we will take that.
Nice. Love to hear it. All right. Well, let's get into it because I know you've got a very, very packed schedule up there. So starting out with James Gladstone, we can jump around to a bunch of just different Jaguars-related topics. But what stands out to you, before we even get into the Jaguars, honestly, I want to talk about just James Gladstone, the person. What stood out to you the most so far this week from his introductory press conference on Monday, but then also talking to him in person, scrum, but then also at the podium on Tuesday, in terms of his background or his personality? What stands out to you about James Gladstone, the person?
Yeah, exactly what I was told by so many people in Los Angeles. He would be, he is. The humility is obviously something not only that comes across in media abilities, but clearly it came across for Shad Khan, Tony Vaselli, and the entire crew who interviewed James Gladstone. And if anything, I know there's been a couple leaks, and again, I don't know what to believe, what not to believe, but that comparatively to some of the other finalists, James Gladstone came off as someone who truly would come at this from a collaborative approach as opposed to a, hey, here is my plan for the organization and for the team. It was much more these are my thoughts, but what would you guys like for me to do to best serve you? Not to go on a rant about a good Jesuit education, but, a servant's heart or servant leadership. I think that that's really at the core of what you see from James Gladstone, from a place of serving less need. And I think that it's an important differentiation, right? Like, you don't want to create a world, and I don't think the Rams have, where you blindly follow someone and you are the assistant and you do whatever they ask you to do. I think even from the time when he was hired in 2016 as Les Snead's assistant, as the then general manager of the St. Louis Rams, I don't think it was from this perspective of, you're going to go get coffee for me. Now, have I heard from people here in Indianapolis that it's wild to them because, yes, James Gladstone was the one who was on the phone verifying measurables with different universities. He was verifying credentialing. We're coming to this event, this showcase. Yes, that same guy, less than 10 years later, is now the general manager of the Jacksonville Jaguars. But at the same time, I think it was an environment in which he, Les, Sean, as they've been detailing throughout the course of the last 72 hours, they were all okay with fighting. They were okay with disagreeing and saying, hey, you think the best way. Let's go ask this person and see what they think the best way forward is. And even when there was friction, they got through that and they had those conversations. And that, for me, Gus, is the biggest takeaway from the Jaguars trifecta, however you want to look at their executive branch. I come away from this and say, again, not to knock Doug Peterson, who I have immense respect for, but at times, and I've heard this from people in Philadelphia as well, Doug would avoid confrontation. I'm not suggesting that Liam Cohen and James Gladstone are going to create a heated environment, because I don't think it's going to be heated, but they are not going to shy away from disagreeing and trying to find a solution.
Yeah, it's definitely all very good to hear. I thought Baselli's remarks at Monday's presser were pretty funny. I mean, not as funny as Mark Long's question about the past conflicts and stuff like that, but Gladstone talking about it this week in Indianapolis said it starts letting go of your ego by not trying to be the one in the room who is right. And I think that's definitely going to be a welcome shift from Jacksonville, because I think that you can just look at the Trayvon Walker selection alone is probably the biggest example of Trent Baalke was more so the guy that was less focused on building relationships with people in the building and more so focused on being right, especially when it came to identifying prospects. And so one thing is intangibles is like definitely the biggest buzzword that I think he's had so far, is that he wants to bring in people that are intangibly rich, both people, players, so that just by them being their authentic selves, they're able to kind of raise the floor of the ecosystem, aka the culture in Jacksonville. And so, yeah, moving it to shift to not just Gladstone the person, but then what he's actually going to do in Jacksonville. Were there any nuggets that you came away with in terms of how he's going to build the roster in this upcoming offseason, or just any nuggets in general that you've picked up from him this week?
Yeah, I think that James Gladstone, in terms of specifics, has done a pretty good job. And I said this on Helmets and Heels yesterday. I don't think it's because he doesn't know who the center is or the left guard is. I think it's because he just doesn't want to speak out of turn and get if you may. So he's done a very good job, not only on the record, but off the record as well, really steering away from any sort of specifics. I'll give you this nugget, Gus. I've had a couple people come up to me here in the media circles, longtime veterans who break news and what have you, and they had their reservations about James Gladstone and what he potentially could become. And they had an impromptu meeting with him yesterday, and independent of each other, these two examples that I spoke with, and both were wowed. Both were extremely impressed and had nearly nothing negative to say. Yeah, it was actually like really cool. Like, he seems like he's going to do a really good job. And like, he seemed very normal and humble and very professional, but also like the type of guy that you're sitting at the bar with and you can have a beer with too. And yes, he is 21 years old, so he actually can drink beer at the bar. I'm just kidding. I had to get out there. But no, I mean, the fact that people who a couple weeks ago were texting me doubting are now bought in is a very significant development. A quick plug. We had Jordan Rodriguez from The Athletic, who covers the Los Angeles Rams. We had her on last Friday, right before the news broke. And as I detailed on Helmets and Heels, we were, say, a little worried because we knew some news could be coming and we didn't want to, have Jordan come on. And then an hour later, they broke the news of who the next general manager of the Jaguars was. But the good news that I want to plug is that she's going to be back on the program on Helmets and Heels. We're going to tape that interview probably, and then it'll air on Friday. Point being, timing wise, we'll see how it works out. Point being, she also interviewed James on NFL, NFL Daily with Greg Rosenthal. And so We'll also talk a little bit about that interview, that I think also it really rubbed people the right way in terms of who James Gladstone is, and that he's not just some kid who looks like he's 12, and he's not just some whiz kid who has been at the hip of Les Snead. He is someone who was empowered and continued to climb the Rams throughout their organization. Yeah,
definitely recommend Jordan Rodriguez's work at The Athletic covering the Rams. One thing that I kind of uncovered just by reading her stuff, trying to learn more about Gladstone, is that the Rams purposefully have a lot of their top brass in the scouting department physically away from each other during the whole draft process. They have a lot of guys working remote, and like the main point of it is to avoid groupthink. And so I was thinking of that when you were talking earlier about how this isn't just some guy who's going to get someone else's coffee, or how like that's not just how the structure is going to work in Jacksonville. So I thought that was an interesting note. Certainly you can pick up a lot of other notes from Jordan, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll give you another nugget in just speaking with some folks in this community.
Good morning. Her stuff, trying to learn more about Gladstone, is that the Rams purposefully have a lot of their top brass in the scouting department physically away from each other during the whole draft process. They have a lot of guys working remote, and like the main point of it is to avoid groupthink. And so I was thinking of that when you were talking earlier about how this isn't just some guy who's going to get someone else's coffee, or how like that's not just how the structure is going to work in Jacksonville. So I thought that was an interesting note. Certainly you can pick up a lot of other notes from Jordan, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll give you another nugget. In just speaking with some folks in the scouting community here in Indianapolis, I think there's respect for Ethan Waugh. There is an understanding of, hey, I wouldn't say that 32 out of 32 NFL teams would have said, we're going with Gladstone. There's no way in hell Ethan Waugh gets a GM job again or has an opportunity to. But I did have at least one media member say to me that, yeah, there's a couple of members of that scouting staff that would have jobs elsewhere, but the rest of them, not so much. And so that's what I'm really curious to see, knowing that the critique league-wide, if only in certain pockets, is that the Jaguars scouting department has not been up to snuff. So that James Gladstone is bringing in his intangibly rich system that he built with Les Snead and the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, you're not going to be able to bring in a whole new scouting staff before the NFL draft. And so the collaboration between those two ideologies is going to be fascinating in finding the next group of Jaguars in April's NFL draft. But then also, of course, looking long term, when presumably come May, we will see a complete shift in that personnel department in some form or fashion.
Yeah, that could be really a potential caveat to this season, and specifically this draft, is that like maybe we don't have a ton of takeaways from this first draft being James Gladstone's truly first draft, because there are so many Jaguars scouts and just personnel people in the building left over. And Gladstone has said on multiple interviews, multiple appearances this week, that he's going to kind of try to shift what he does and adapt to what the Jaguars do for this offseason. And then after the spring, after the draft, they'll get more so into adapting to what he wants to do or what the entire process is going to look like in his vision. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see just how much, not how much influence he has, but how quickly he's able to get his process truly up and running. And then in terms of Ethan Waugh specifically, Shipley was asking during the scrum yesterday about Ethan Waugh, and Gladstone said he's enjoyed working with him and he'll look forward to working with him through the spring. And that was about the extent of the answer. And so we can say that Waugh is still in the building and he's still working with the Jaguars, but Gladstone did say that after the draft, after the spring, that's when they're going to start making bigger decisions, not just in terms of the process, but also in terms of who they are employing. And so something to keep an eye on in the future. But Mia, any other nuggets you captured from any of his various appearances?
Yeah, not really. Again, like I said, I just want to make sure that like I got the word out there. We put the word out there that we back up Gus, but also that many of the doubters of James Gladstone have like come up to me. And I mean, even when we had him on Radio Row behind me at our 1010XL booth, like I had multiple friends in the media world tap me on the shoulder and go, "Is that him?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're just like, they're like, "What? What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's him." Like, I don't understand. And for some of them to get to know him a little bit, I think this week, and for people and first and foremost, I don't really care what the media thinks. Obviously, it matters what people in the Miller Electric Center think, and people in the organization to get to know him better this week. I think it's going to be really important. I love what Liam Cohen has done in bringing the entire operation here to Indianapolis this week. I'm curious if this is actually going to become an annual tradition, knowing that the Los Angeles Rams and so many of their proxies, whether it be Kyle Shanahan, who's not here this week, whether it be Matt LaFleur, who's not here this week, the idea of will we see the Jaguars in Indianapolis each and every year? I think that's going to we'll see. It's a year-to-year thing. But knowing they literally brought everyone here, Gus, I mean, from security to every single coach, I had some of them on my flight, to staffers, certainly the entire scouting department, they're all here. And I think it's a great team building exercise as well as for the rest of the league to understand, like, hey, there is a plan, there is a vision here in place.
Absolutely. All right, Mia, I'll let you go. Let you run and do what you got to do. Or do you have
I thought you wanted more nuggets about like prospects or something like that. Come on.
I was going to say, do you have any, like, if you have any other nuggets, then go for it. But if you have any like lingering questions, like questions that you still haven't gotten answered, whether it's by Gladstone or just kind of open-ended questions about the Jaguars this offseason, or even any NFL combine questions that you're looking forward to have answered by the end of this week.
Yeah, I think it's more evident than ever that the Jaguars will be going with an offensive or a defensive lineman with their fifth overall pick. If they are to pick at the fifth spot, if they trade back, they trade up, like one way or another. Like it's going to be a lineman. I can tell you that. I came away from Mason Graham very impressed. Quite frankly, I know he's from Anaheim, California. I know he obviously went across the country to Michigan. If it was a little bit more prolific of a program, he probably would have fit into the Iowa program very well. And I feel very qualified in saying that. Checks his ego at the door. Wasn't a guy banging his chest up there saying I should be the number one overall pick. And that brings me to perhaps the biggest nugget that I'm struggling with here in Indianapolis, which is I don't want to say baggage, but these guys at the top, man, like Mason Graham, I hope he's there at 5 for the Jaguars because I think there's going to be teams that are turned off by some of the personalities, not just in this presumed top 10 clumping of prospects, but also beyond that. I mean, I've had multiple people like come up to me and say like James Pierce from Tennessee, which I think the word was already out there that he's a little edgy. There's a lot of things going on there. And apparently his media availability this morning was a reflection of that. I know that some of his interviews have not necessarily hit home with some teams so far here. A little bit too much of that me. I think this is a good way to like bring this show full circle because James Gladstone is not me. And there's some prospects here, including the Tennessee edge rusher, who are very me. And I'm the best player and I'm the best talent in the draft. And I'm okay with marketing yourself, but at one point or another, it's going to come off as egotistical. I think Abdul Carter is going to be really interesting here over the next few weeks. I think that, look, we're going to be dissecting every little ounce of these gentlemen and their lives. But I do think that there's been a notion here in Indy, and I don't know if it existed before, that perhaps he's also a little bit edgy, that maybe he also comes off as me. Maybe he comes off as, well, I want to go to this organization, this team. I want to call the shots. If I'm in your team, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And maybe there's some teams who come away from that and like it. And there's some other teams who may come away from it. My first thought is of New England Patriots with Mike Vrabel, who come away from it and say, okay, like he's got to get reined in a little bit, but we are the organization that is well built and well equipped to do that, to check his ego. And then, of course, you throw out the 2 quarterback prospects, and will they actually go before the Jaguars select at number 5 overall? And there's a lot of people around here who they're not worried about Shedeur. The early returns have been that Shedeur has certainly been an outstanding citizen here in Indianapolis, and it sounds like things are going well through that process. I would say that Deion, most people here know who Deion Sanders is, both not just his name and his his credentials, but also who he is as a person. If anything, I think I've heard from more than one person, both among teams, and I've also heard it from people in the media, that the eldest brother, Buck, bit of a question mark. Someone who most notably apparently carries the camera around Shedeur, and he's like the executive producer, and he's like now. That is the bigger question mark for some teams right now. Shedeur is not a question. The question is Buck. And that's going to be very interesting to see. So I think that I outline all this, not because it necessarily relates directly to the Jacksonville Jaguars and who they should be selecting, but because there's going to be some movement of some kind or some sort of surprise before the Jaguars pick in this April's NFL draft that I want Jaguar fans to be ready for, because that's the bigger reason I'm concerned about Mason Graham not being there. Because if he's there, you're going to take him. If he's not there, we haven't gotten a chance to talk to Will Campbell yet. Heard from enough people that, well, yes, you would like to give him the opportunity to play tackle, and the Jaguars have 2 tackles. I mean, I say you take him because he's the cleanest prospect. He's the highest character. He's intangibly rich, at least from what we know on the outset, and you run with it. You take the double off the wall. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Oh, and one more. People are going to continue to scrutinize Tet McMillan. Heard some people say he doesn't like football. I've heard other people say his catch radius is so stupid it doesn't matter. I had someone else tell me today, well, he's going to fall out of the first round when he runs a 4.78. So, yeah, we are in the thick of it all, Gus. But I do want to give those little nuggets to you guys because I know Lauren and Taylor on Tuesday were like, all right, so who's the prospect everybody's talking about? And I'm like, dude, we just got done interviewing James and Liam, and like I haven't even like talked to anyone else yet. So yeah, so that's what we're cooking with here, and hopefully more scoop.
Appreciate it, Mia. Well, I do think the character counts note is definitely good for the Jaguars too.
Thank you, Bruce Pearl. Character counts.
Character counts. Because I feel like that's my single biggest takeaway from hearing Gladstone speak this week. Again, he's looking for intangibly rich human beings to bring into the organization. They're not going to bring people in because they're trying to change them. They're going to bring people in because they want those people's characters to change the organization. And so I definitely think that, like, I don't think the Jaguars would be the kind of team to, like, take a Jalen Carter if he falls or something like that. I think that they're definitely going to prioritize, again, intangibles, as Gladstone would say. So we'll end it there. We'll certainly have plenty more takes, opinions, nuggets to share. We'll be back tomorrow with Hacker, 9:04 a.m. But this is actually a recording, so I will stay on. The present version of Gus will stay on and answer any questions if there are any. But Mia, thanks again. Safe travels back home.
Thanks, homies. Catch you later.
All right. What's up? It's a present version of Gus. Sorry about the little gap in the middle there. I had some Wi-Fi difficulties, but hopefully the lag wasn't too bad. But yeah, the only question I see is from Robert Lamison on YouTube asking, does Carter fall down the board north? Does Carter fall down the board? Abdul Carter, there was a tweet from Adam Schefter this morning. Tests today revealed the potential #1 pick, Abdul Carter, has a stress reaction in his right foot, and the Penn State standout will need to decide soon whether to have surgery, sources told ESPN. So I think that Abdul Carter has some off-the-field issues too that could pop up, especially if there's some teams that are trying to get him to fall to their pick. Maybe we'll hear more about that, as well as this potential foot injury. I personally don't think that Abdul Carter is going to fall. I know that Mia just hinted and said that there could be a surprise faller in the draft, and I assume this is kind of what she was hinting towards. And I mean, the Jaguars didn't think they would be able to get Jalen Ramsey. Jaguars didn't think they would be able to get Josh Hines-Allen. I don't know if they really expected to be able to get Brian Thomas Jr. with the 23rd pick last year. And so the draft obviously is a crapshoot. It's random. You don't really know what's going to happen. But with that caveat, I would be very surprised if Abdul Carter did fall all the way down to the 5th overall pick. And that'll do it. No other questions I see, but we'll be back tomorrow with Hacker, 9:04 a.m. Eastern on Friday to go over more Combine stuff, more Gladstone stuff. So see you guys then. Appreciate everyone for listening and watching. As always, adios.